understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
It is time for the podcast. How are you? Hope all is, despite the madness in the world, going well in your world. We're going to pick up where we left off on Tuesday. We're going to talk about the Irish electoral cycle, the Irish issues that are at stake, but we're going to link them to the broader change in the world, the shifting of the tectonic plates, the fact that Trump's election is, at the very least, a signal to the elites around the world. And I mean the commentariat, I mean journalists, I mean commentaries, I mean public servants, I mean everybody who's involved, I mean corporate leaders, etc., that something is not right. How are you, Ed?
I'm good. I'm good.
You're looking particularly solid. You're looking particularly well. Your skin is shining.
Yes.
All is good.
That's a glow, Mac. That's a glow.
It's a glow, exactly. And I know you are deeply enmeshed in the election, or the doorstep, the porch approach to the election.
Yeah, we are having a bit of fun in our house, but it's serious fun, actually, because in fairness to all my girls, well, 3 of them are here and one is off in London, as you know, but we've had quite a few people knocking on the door on their campaign trail. And do you know what's amazing? And all the girls have said this independently. When the people arrive at the door, bing bong, oh, hello, I'm from Fine Gael or Sinn Féin or whatever it is. And you kind of go, yeah, what have you done for the local area?
The area, yeah.
And one of them, the first thing, well, I changed the sequence on the traffic lights at the end of the road.
That's a very important thing.
But what I've noticed is there's no listening. There's absolutely no listening. And they bombard you with 3 points. We're going to do this. And of course, you'll do the right thing on Friday and vote for me. And
vote early and often.
But my girls have 3 questions each prepared to ask them. And they freak out.
It's a nightmare for the canvassers.
But Izzy turns around to one of them and says, okay, I'm final year economics. What can you do to help me stay in the country?
And the answer is 0.
Is 0.
Yeah.
And one of them kind of went, talked about traffic lights or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And then Izzy had the 2 dogs with her. And she turns around and says, well, I'm a dog lover too. And kind of walked off going, yes, I crushed it.
You got to give them a break. Well, at least your family are engaging with the electoral cycle. I just hear now the sounds of young fellas getting out of the scratcher. And it's very late in the day. And all I heard upstairs, because one of the mates stayed on the sofa, Yeah. It was very late. And this is a really good sign of a good night.
Yeah.
This is election or no election. I've lost my mobile phone. So they were in a terrible heap when they came home. They're almost sheepish up there. They're not coming down to the basement. Normally they come down to the basement and say, hi, John, hi, Dad, la, la, la. But they're in the horrors up there. So I wish we could inject a little bit more of Davis civility into the McWilliams household, which would mean that, the aggregate, we'd be some sort of politically aligned people. But I just think there's big pints of water and there's heads and there's no mobile phone.
And they had a rake of toasted cheeses when they came in.
A rake of toasted cheeses. And what I always love is the sort of... is the various bits of clothing that have been discarded as they got in, and the warm can of Heineken on the kitchen table with the fag butt in it.
And a straw.
It's just lovely. There you go. The contrast between the Davis household and the McWilliams household. Anyway, it is good to have you on this podcast. We are going to talk about immigration, but we're going to talk about it in 2 ways. One way is the very simple idea. If you want, we talked about running the economy hot last time out. If you want to run the economy hot, which means you want to absorb in as many immigrants as possible, you want to drive GDP growth, you want to drive profit growth, you want to drive all this sort of financial metrics, then you need, on the other hand, to do a deal with the people to say, in order for that to work, we have to accelerate development. We have to accelerate the building of houses and trains and roads and schools and
Yep,
hospitals.
yep, yep.
And that means we have to inconvenience you because we're talking about rapid rather than tepid change, right?
Yeah.
So this is the logic. So the basic idea in economics, you've got supply and demand. If you run the economy hot, you're accelerating demand. If you do not accelerate supply to act in parallel with that increase in demand, you will get bottlenecks. Classic bottleneck is traffic.
Yes.
One of the greatest examples, one of the most useless wastes of time. Although I know there are many blokes I know who quite like a bit of traffic.
Well, I have to say, my 92-year-old mother loves a good traffic jam.
Yeah, she loves a jam. I know.
She just loves sitting in
I
the
mean,
car.
traffic,
It doesn't matter where
you know,
she is.
Sometimes there's lots of people say, oh my God, traffic is awful. I know there are people who quite like getting into their cars. I know it's very, very antisocial.
Yeah.
Turning on a podcast and sitting.
This one, I hope.
Hopefully this one.
Yeah.
Sitting, kind of vegging for an hour on the way home from work.
Okay,
so
it's a little me time.
Yeah, it's a little me time. But that's one thing. But let's go back to the idea. If you want to run the economy hot, you need to inconvenience people.
Mm.
And if running the economy hot and inconvenience people is the long-term objective of the political parties, well, so be it.
Yeah.
But you cannot run the economy hot and tell people, don't worry, nothing's going to change. Your view is going to be the same. Nobody's going to move in beside you. There's not going to be rail works in the day. We're not going to dig deep under your house to put in a metro, right? So these are the choices that have to be articulated. And again, I come back to one of the interesting things about Trump and what we see happening is this idea to signal to the elites. Now, the elites are the very people who are saying, don't worry, there'll be no change.
Mm.
But on the other hand, we're going to embrace immigration. I'm using immigration as one example of massive social, political, economic, demographic change, which requires a certain amount of adult joined up thinking to say, okay, we want that. Then we're going to have to inconvenience you on all these issues. So you will not have the Ireland of yesterday if you seek the Ireland of tomorrow.
Yes.
That's the key. And that kind of struck me when I see what our friend Trump and his allies are saying about MAGA and America and immigration. The challenge actually is really to the elites. There was a very interesting thing written by Branko Milanovic, who is a Serbian economist, American Serbian economist, who was at Kilconomics last year. Great thinker, right? Mm. And he was comparing Trump to Gorbachev. Now, I know this sounds strange, but he was basically saying Gorbachev comes in the mid-1980s, 1984.
Yeah.
He is the Secretary General of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. So he's like the Pope for communists, right?
Yeah.
He is the holy father of communists, right? And since the Second World War, the communist/socialist world had built up a hierarchy of bishops all around the place. Bishops in Poland, bishops in Czech Republic, bishops of Czechoslovakia, who were the communist apparatchiks, the elite, who created around the Soviet Union these satellites. So there was a certain amount of integration of ideas, of people, all that sort of stuff, right? When Gorbachev comes in and says, I'm going to reform the Soviet Union, the people who were actually most threatened by that were not the average Russian. Mm. It was actually the elites in the satellite countries, in the allied countries. It's like, again, if the Pope comes in and he changes the world and the Catholic religion, the people who are most discombobulated by it are the bishops, right? Because they've got, shit, we've got a new fucking hymn sheet, right? And fascinatingly, Trump is doing the same to us. The people of our elites, and when I say elites, I mean the public servants, the heads of the Department of Finance, the Department of Foreign Affairs in Ireland, and their equivalents all around the Western countries, the political parties, the presidency, etc., they have all learned a form of behavior under the American umbrella of globalization, of globalism, of free movement of this, that, and the other.
Well, they were pushing
of institutions, of the World Health Organization, of the United Nations, of the IMF, of the World Bank, all these institutions that the Americans were pushing. Mm. In the same way as the Soviets under Gorbachev or prior to Gorbachev were pushing their own
Yeah.
institutional infrastructure. Now, with the MAGA crowd in power, the people who really have to change their behavior are the elites, not only in America, but also in the other countries that are American adjacent, right?
Yes.
And that, I think,
Like us. Yeah.
exactly. And that, I think, is the major change. So therefore, when it comes to things like migration, the voices of those people who say, well, hold on a second, we don't want that many migrants because it's changing the culture, it's changing the institution, they are becoming much and much more powerful. And it's that idea of the Overton window. What was unacceptable yesterday becomes acceptable today, and what was acceptable today becomes redundant, right? And that's what I think is going on. So it's the idea to shape the Irish election in the context of the wind of change that has blown across and is blowing across from the Atlantic. And I think that's the way to look at it. So if we look at immigration in Ireland, right, the immigration policy we have in Ireland appears to be very much located in the 2000s, in the noughties. It's kind of like a sort of very much a globalized world. And I think that's going to change. So what we're going to do in this podcast, John, is we're going to talk to Annalise Johnson of The Economist about a thing which they have come up with called the Footloose Index, which reveals the amount of people who are traveling, the amount of people who want to emigrate, and the amount of graduates, right? And what I suppose it's looking at is immigration through the frame of immigration as a corporate recruitment policy. Remember we had a go at HR the other day?
Yes.
Now we're actually getting back in, we're thinking HR is great, right? Don't ever accuse us of consistency, right? Listeners,
That's the truth.
do not ever accuse us of consistency. In actual fact, as Waldo Emerson said, consistency is the hobgoblin of the unimaginative mind.
Yes.
Isn't that a great expression?
Who is he?
He was an American writer from the 1850s. So there's a whole
Right, okay.
So Nathaniel Hawthorne and these were and Walden, these were American writers who believed in the great wilderness. A really interesting part of American culture. So we will not go back there.
Okay.
But just say we'll start with Moby Dick. First lines of Moby Dick, call me Ishmael. And away we go. But that's a different gig. But think about the idea. Consistency is the hobgoblin of the unimaginative mind, right? Which basically means you should change your mind.
Yes, yeah,
Right?
yeah. Well, as the man says, when information changes, so does my mind.
Yeah, but our problem is when opinion changes, so does our mind. When the last person in the pub tells us something interesting, so does our mind. But anyway, I come back to this idea, right? So we're going to talk about people traveling. And the question is whether or not immigration should be like HR. So you get the best people.
Yes.
So you acquire the best people. So you basically say, yes, we're open, but we're not open to everybody.
Yeah.
Because we have created something here. There is a value in our citizenship, our working permit. We are giving you great opportunity.
It's a bit like
what are you giving us?
Yeah. It's a bit like certainly in the 90s when I actually considered moving to New Zealand at one stage. But it was a
That's a bit. Never told. I feel I'm like a forlorn lover. You never told me. Like
for about 5 minutes, I thought about it. But there was a point system to go to New Zealand.
Yes,
and you had to be a graduate, and you had to have this, that, and all the rest. And I think I scraped in. I would have been able to.
The bar
go,
was very low that year, I believe.
Yes, yeah. They didn't have enough sound engineers or bird watchers.
Bird watchers, exactly. Qualified bird watchers.
Actually, just going back to the campaigning and the bing bongs on the doors and stuff. You know the way they when they're going on a campaign and whatever politician it is, and they enter an estate and they have about 10
and they
people.
fan out.
Yeah, and there's 10 people and they kind of come in. And it's like a raid. I was thinking about this. I don't know if you'll get this or not. But long-tailed tits, the bird.
Hold on a second. Okay.
They live in kind of families or flocks of about 10 to 15 birds. And you see that we have them in our garden. And they come into a garden and they raid it. And it's like picking all the berries and all the rest. And then they're gone. It's like the
Like a
right
Fianna
Viking-
Fáil canvassing machine.
It's exactly like that. Long-tailed tits. Here
John,
they
I
come.
love the way your brain works. So John is sitting there in the kitchen having a cup of tea. Bing, bong, the door goes. And he goes, most people go, oh, it's the canvasser. What am I going to say? And John goes, long-tailed tits. The way they raid. It's a raiding party. It's a raiding
That's
party.
exactly what it's like.
Where were we? Let's go back and we'll talk about this issue of the world being changed, right? And immigration being possibly something like a recruitment drive.
Yeah.
That you say, okay, and the reason you're allowed acquired, the best people, and I say acquired because you're taking them in, is that they will give you something back.
Yeah.
And I think this goes to the root of the immigration issue here, where lots and lots of people suggest that we are not acquiring or taking in the highest quality people. And therefore people are getting pissed off, right? That's one side of things. But the other side of things is you kind of also need a little bit of chaos for the economy to grow. Like sometimes, again, I come back to the Soviet system. The reason the Soviet system was so unimpressive is because everything was predestined and predetermined.
Yeah.
And in a way, you sort of need that sort of frisson of mad immigration to get things going. I'm reading a book at the moment, John, right? Which I've just got called Boom, Bubbles and the End of Stagnation by Bern Hobart and Tobias Huber, published by Stripe Press. It's a beautiful thing.
Oh, by Stripe.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, by Stripe Press, which they produce absolutely beautiful books. I mean, they really are works of art. But one of the, the quote on the cover is, technological innovation is more driven by excess exuberance and irrationality than by cost-benefit analyses, rational calculations, and careful and deliberate planning.
Right.
So it's a really interesting idea. I think it's a bit of a game changer, this book. And it's basically saying that bubbles, right? Irrationality, madness, craziness, effervescence, all of these things, rational economists say, these are bad things. It's making the argument that these are the sort of mad things out of which come mad ideas.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
You need the craziness. So we've always said before, like you had the unbelievable excesses of the railway mania in Ireland and Britain in the 1850s.
Yeah.
We still have the train network.
Yes.
The rails. Somebody built them. So I know lots
And we
of
still have tulips.
We still have tulips. We do. We still have tulips, right? But some people lost lots of money.
Yeah.
But the legacy of these crazy bubbles and speculative manias was technological breakthroughs which are with us today. And therefore part of the madness of economics, the exuberance and the excitement is that these are the conditions that deliver kind of true believers. Well, I mean, and these are, people make great speculative bets on things.
But I mean, you even go back to the dot-com bubble.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of madness in that. And then that burst. But what came out of that was a technology that allowed us to go to Web 2.0 and dynamic web and all the rest. And then there's another kind of
social
bubble.
media and all that other stuff. Yeah. So it's a fascinating book. And the idea here is that the world is stagnating and has been stagnating for a long, long time, innovatively.
Yeah.
Very much a tech book, right? And the way in which you kickstart innovation is you allow these bubbles do their thing. And that's what creates...
Well, I mean, we were talking on Tuesday's podcast about the giveaways of Mars bars and bounties and stuff, which just...
Twixes, please.
Which just reflects the stagnation of ideas, political ideas and vision.
Exactly. It is a reflection of stagnation, But to today's topic, right? If you want that effervescence, you need to have new minds, excited people, innovative people, and people who really want to make a difference, right? So the opposite of stagnation and the opposite of an aversion to change, you need people who embrace change. Immigrants are those people by definition.
Yeah.
And the question is now, how do you deal with a world on the move? So we're going to go talk to Ainsley Johnson, who is a data analyst stroke journalist. I always call data storyteller. I think these are always better descriptions at The Economist. And she has written something fascinating, which she calls the Footloose Index about immigration. So we're going to talk to Ainsley Johnson about The Economist, and then we'll go and digest what it all means for us.
And just a quick note, Annalie's line is not great. So Forgive me for that. We're at the mercy of the web.
First of all, Ainsley, good morning to you and welcome to the podcast.
Morning, David.
Now, Ainsley, let us talk about this article you wrote in The Economist a couple of weeks ago, which talks about something called the Footloose Index. Now, what is this? It seems to me to be all about graduate mobility around the world. Explain it to me.
Yeah, exactly. So, around the world, in a lot of developed countries, we've got increasingly aging populations, and we're really dependent on skilled migrants to come in and help our economies keep them going. What we were interested in is this question of which countries are the most attractive to skilled people. Why do skilled people want to move to the places that they do? And from that, if we can sort of figure out which countries are the most attractive, can we figure out what it is that is really sort of drawing people to different places?
Okay.
So one way to do that would be to look at net migration numbers, or how many people are actually coming into given countries. But with that, that's a little bit tricky, because sort of how many graduates a place is actually getting is both a function of how attractive that place is, but also how easy it is to move there. So, are there easy visas? Are there plenty of jobs that people can get? And so on.
So which are they? Where do people want to go?
In our calculations, the sort of top three that have sort of jostled for position over time since 2010 are Canada, Australia, and America.
No surprise there.
Yeah, big, rich English-speaking countries. Which one has been first, second, third has kind of jostled around over time. In our most recent set of data, which was from between 2021 and 2023, we had Canada first, then Australia, then the US.
So tell me, what actually do these numbers mean?
So as I said, we wanted to know which countries are the most attractive. So it's a poll of 150 countries, and in each country they surveyed several thousands of people from 2010 going all the way up to last year of 2023. So from this data, we just extracted the people who had done at least an undergraduate degree.
Okay.
In this data set, Gallup asked people questions about their life, about their work, about their family, their well-being. But one of the questions that they asked is, would the respondents be interested in moving abroad permanently? And if so, where would they like to go?
Okay.
So what I then had is this huge data set of people from every country in the world reporting whether they would like to move to any other country in the world. And what I did with this data is I just calculated if every person were allowed to move where they wanted.
Okay.
So effectively, if every person were allowed to move wherever they wanted, how would the makeup of the graduate population change?
So let's say, if everybody who has a third level degree were allowed to move to wherever they wanted, what would the end look like? I.e., what would, let's say, Canada look like, Ireland look like, Germany look like, Britain look like, if everybody could do whatever they wanted?
Exactly. So how would the graduate population change? So which countries would gain, which countries would lose, and by how much?
What I noticed here in the data, I'm looking at it, is Britain has fallen very dramatically.
Yes. Britain, in the sort of first surveys that we had from sort of 2010 to 2013, Britain was around 6th in the data. It was behind the big countries like Canada, United States, and Australia. It was behind Germany, but it was ahead of most other European countries. What then happened was, unsurprisingly, everyone knows the history, Brexit, and around that time, sort of 2016 to 2018, Britain really tumbled down the rankings. So at that point, what we can see in the data is that far fewer European people, so people living in France, Germany, said at this time that they wanted to move to Britain. And what we also saw in the data is that a lot of people from Britain said that they wanted to leave. A lot of graduates who were living in Britain said they were no longer interested in living there. They would move if they could. Britain at that point tumbled down to around 20th on the leaderboard. And in the most recent data, it has recovered a bit. It's around 14th, but it's still well behind France, Italy, Germany, Spain, and the other big Anglophone countries.
So that's the story for Britain. The other story that stands out in the data is the story for Portugal, which was, down there 25th or whatever, and seems to have accelerated rapidly. So far more people would choose Portugal if they could. Why is that?
Yeah, Portugal has an amazing story if you look at the data. So between 2010 and 2012, our estimates were that if everybody moved where they wanted, Portugal's graduate population would rise by about 1%. But by the time we get to 2021 to 2023, Portugal's population would swell by around 140% if everyone moved where they wanted. So it's
amazing.
huge.
It's an amazing story.
Yeah.
And so why has it become so attractive? I mean, it's always been a lovely country, but why have graduates, i.e. highly skilled people, chosen Portugal in such enormous numbers in the last 10 odd years?
Yeah, I think it's probably a mixture of different things. Portugal got a big boost of people during the pandemic, a lot of sort of remote workers. It really sort of marketed itself as a remote working destination where people could, work by the beach, surf in the afternoon, log on for meetings in the morning. They've done a lot of marketing in places like America. They've really improved the connectivity in terms of sort of flights with other parts of the world. And they've also made it easy for people to move there, for people to get visas and to be able to go there, whether it be for working opportunities or for graduate jobs as well.
Can I come to Ireland, right? Because Ireland at the moment is talking about immigration all the time. We have had a huge increase in talented migrants, particularly attracted in by, in fact, I'm quite shocked that Ireland's position hasn't changed in 10 years on your index, because it feels like a country that changed completely. It feels like a country that has far more international graduates than we had 10 years ago. Tell me what's going on in our own country. It's always better to some outsider to tell us what's going on here sometimes.
Yeah, so Ireland on our overall ranking ranks in around 20th. Between 2010 and 2012, if everyone who wanted to move did, around 200,000 extra graduates would come to Ireland. Now those numbers it's more than 500,000. So there really has been a big increase in how many people say they want to come to Ireland. It's just sort of that's been happening everywhere to sort of a similar degree.
So there's about 500,000 people out there who, if they wanted to come here, would come here, talented people.
Yeah, there were a few interesting things actually from the data, a few interesting points on Ireland though. If you're looking at the people who say they want to move to Ireland, the sort of profile where those people are coming from is slightly different than a lot of the other English-speaking countries.
Explain that to me.
So if we look at the sort of big English-speaking countries like the US, Canada, Australia, even also to some extent Britain, most of the people who say they want to move there are graduates from places like India and China, more kind of developing countries. Okay. But in Ireland, by far the biggest number of people who say they want to move to Ireland are people from the United States, closely followed then by Britain and then a host of other countries. It's sort of interesting to me that Ireland doesn't seem to have such a big profile among graduates from India and China.
Well, I think maybe to explain that is a lot of Irish Americans who have cultural, familial, ethnic links to this country probably want to come here more, number one. Number two, American multinationals tend to be the major dynamo of attracting in graduates. So there's some overlap there. And number three, I think with respect to India and China, because Ireland doesn't have a big colonial footprint, there aren't that many great links, although it is changing dramatically. But that is fascinating. So basically the people who want to come here are quite different from the type of people who want to go to, for example, Australia or Canada.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. It's important to note though here, again, we are just looking at graduates. So we're just primarily moving for sort of better jobs or maybe even a better just way of life.
No, absolutely. And again, this is what I want to focus on before we go, which is the idea is the impact of talented workers. I always have felt that it is such a massive, massive negative if your educated people are leaving. Because number one, it's a cost to society, a deadweight cost that has already been spent in educating these people and creating networks for these people. They take their talent with them. On the other hand, getting in talented, networked graduates from foreign countries, we know in the American data, these people are more innovative. They set up more companies. They seek more patents, all those kind of leading indicators of innovation. But number two, they also bring know-how and connections and networks and links to the outside world, which are invaluable. Have you done in The Economist any sense of how much of a positive it is for a country to get even one graduate in, let alone 100,000 graduates?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you say, we haven't sort of done anything personally ourselves, any sort of specific analysis. But yeah, as you say, there's a whole academic literature on this sort of, immigrants are far more likely to be producing patents or to be sort of making new innovations and things like that. But it's not something that we've sort of specifically looked at ourselves. And in this data doesn't really speak to that, because it's sort of more just about where people would like to move rather than the impact of them moving.
And Ainsley, before you go, what do you think will be the impact of Trumpism on the amount of people who want to leave their home countries? The amount of people who want to go to America will clearly change because America is much more hard to get into. And what it'll do to your index, what would you think it might do to your index over the course of the next 5 odd years?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I think one thing quite interesting in the US data and why the US sort of loses out in position, I mentioned it came third at the moment compared to Canada and Australia, is if you just look at the number of people who want to move to different places, America comes out on top by mile. But America, far more graduates from America say that they want to leave compared to Canada and compared to Australia. And that's why it ended up losing out. In terms of why that is, the data doesn't sort of specifically speak to that, but it feels like it may be things more related to sort of long-term appeal of a country, things like healthcare, safety, family support, all of that sort of stuff.
Ainsley, that has been fascinating. That's Ainsley Johnson of The Economist. The index is the Footloose Index. It's well worth having. Just Google it, have a look at it, because it is a map of the world which you sometimes don't see, which is the map of the world that might be, had people the choice to move to where they want to move. And of course, there's all sorts of barriers to that. Those barriers are going to increase over the next while, clearly, because Trumpism has changed the world dramatically. But fascinating stuff. Ainsley Johnson, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Thanks for having me.
Fascinating stuff, Mac, actually. What are the numbers, though, in Ireland?
So the numbers on immigration, John, right, for this year, from the 12 months to April 2024, show that net immigration in Ireland, or net migration, is 79,300 people. Mm-hmm. So that's when you take away the amount of people who've come into the country vis-a-vis the amount of people who've left the country. Yeah. So that's the net figure is 80-odd thousand, right? That is a huge amount of people. From the perception of homes, for example, think about the following. Most of Irish people who are emigrating are people in their 20s, right? They've largely been living with their parents, right? Yeah. So when they leave, it doesn't mean a new home comes up, right? Because they were already in their parents' house, right? However, every single migrant needs a home who comes in. Yeah. So the balance sheet when it comes to housing is skewed dramatically towards a massive increase in the demand for housing. So this year alone, right, 149,200 immigrants arrived into Ireland, of which 30,000 were returning Irish citizens. Yeah. In addition, we've seen the number of asylum seekers triple in the last 2 years.
Right, yeah.
So there were about 14,037 applications made to August of this year. Mm-hmm. That exceeds the 13,200 registered for the entire of last year. Yeah. So if the rate of asylum seekers continues to increase, what we're going to get is we're going to have about 17 or 18,000, right? Again, these people, as we know, have to go somewhere. Yeah. They have to put some, and there are no houses, right? And of course, the fact that 33% of the asylum seekers who are illegal immigrants, who have arrived here illegally, and they're claiming asylum, and those asylums are being processed. The fact that 33% of them are, young adult, young males, that's what freaks out lots and lots of people, right? So you look at all these things, but while asylum seekers or illegal migrants or whatever we call them have grabbed the headlines, the real figure is the growth in work permits given out in recent years. So based on the figures from the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, a total of 33,000 odd work permits were issued this year. That's a 6-fold increase from the 5,000 issued on average per year for the last decade.
Wow.
So that's
where
the real surge is coming from, or the real increase. Indians accounted for a third of all these permits, followed by Brazilians, Filipinos, Pakistanis, and South Africans. These are where South Africans. These are where the people are coming from, right? Now, you may well see, if you look at the health service, because I was in hospital the other day, full of immigrant workers. So you may well see that these are all frontline workers. I'm not too sure, right?
Yeah.
But what we see, so you have a combination of Ukrainians fleeing the war, asylum seekers, and legal immigrants, right?
Well, I have to say, my mum is in nursing home.
Yeah.
Really good nursing home. I would say 90% of the staff there, and they're all brilliant, I have to say.
And they're all immigrants.
And they're all immigrants.
Yeah. So this is what's happening in the society, right? And this is the change. But it would be irresponsible to argue that the upward movement in house prices is not related to all these people coming in, because they need somewhere to live. And this, again, is the sort of irresponsibility, right? So house prices have risen since 2013 by 130%. The median property price in Ireland is 300 grand, and prices are rising about 10% nationally. So that's the fact of the matter, right?
Yeah.
There's only 35,000 homes in total available for rent in a society of 5.5 odd million people, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's nothing. And the shortage of houses and the rise in rents have hit young people the hardest. The number of homeowners aged between 25 and 34 has dropped from 60% in 2013 to 27%. So they're all renting, and they are the people who want to emigrate. So they are the Irish people who want to emigrate, right? So you have all this dynamic going on, and yet there seems to be a refusal to accept the connection between the number of people coming in and the inconvenience housing these people will cause to the local population. So the politicians don't seem to be able to join up the two things. Immigration, new people coming in with hopes and dreams and aspirations of a better life, creates an effervescent dynamic, which leads to, as these guys were saying, great innovation.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
They know different people, they have different networks, they use different technologies, they speak different languages, they've been open for different education systems. This is all really good stuff.
And of course, we know that immigrants, we were migrants ourselves. When you migrate, you're getting off your arse.
You're getting off.
And you're not going over somewhere to sit on your arse.
Yes.
You're going to work.
Yes.
And make a difference.
You're getting off your Swiss roll.
Yeah.
You actually are, right? But in order for the society to adjust to this change, the political class have to explain to people that they will be inconvenienced when we try to expand supply to deal with this demand. And what that inconvenience means is, no, you don't have a right to a view. No, you don't have a right to demand who lives beside you. No, you don't have a right to suggest that in terms of density, our buildings should not go up over 5 stories or whatever it happens to be. Because the very people who are looking after your mother need to live somewhere.
Yeah.
And they need to live close to where the nursing homes is.
Exactly.
Because if they don't live close, you get traffic.
Yeah.
And you get jams, and you get snarls up, and you get congestion, and all that sort of stuff. So what would seem to me is the choice in this election, which will not be articulated at the doorsteps when you're talking about long-tailed tits and the electorate campaigners are saying, I'd quite like a dog myself, right?
Yes.
Is this connection, this trade-off between the amount of people who want to come in here, which is significant and can add enormously to the society, and the inconvenience that that puts on what I would call the contented class who are quite happy with what they have.
Yeah.
And that is the core of the political conundrum that migration has unearthed But more to the point, John, that is the issue that Trumpism is throwing down to the elites who have basically said for the last 50 years, all will be grand, follow us. Trumpism is saying no. And in the same way as Gorbachev posed a bigger threat to the communist elites in Eastern Europe and an opportunity for the people of Eastern Europe to move, Trumpism poses a much bigger threat to the elites than to the people. We'll talk to you next week.